Okay, so this is going to be another political video, but it's going to be a little bit different from others. And I'm going to be focusing on a very, very specific issue, which I believe is a very important issue. Just going to turn off the radio. So the audio is absolutely clear. Okay, politics. Politics. Politics is power, right? Politics from both a social politics perspective and ideological politics perspective, technical politics perspective, whatever way you look at politics, politics is power because those who get into the political arena become legislators and the decisions that they make impact millions of lives. Now, I'm not going to go through this video with all my ins and outs as to my reflections on politics. That would take hours upon hours upon hours. I am a political person, I am a political minded person. I'd say perhaps more so than the average person. And that shouldn't be seen as a vain statement. It's just that, people have interests and I happen to be interested in politics. Um, Not necessarily every particular policy area, but just as a general concept. I follow politics closely and I follow elections closely. There is one issue, though, I want to really touch on that I think perhaps gets underestimated: anger. Anger and politics. Now, I'm not going to touch on anger with politicians, which some people may have thought was the track that I was going down. That's not the issue I want to talk about, although that certainly exists. Um, Actually, I rather respect politicians, believe it or not. I've made a video before talking about how I feel sometimes recently I was at this is related to the point. I was at a meeting um, with various people, and within that meeting, someone said that one of the issues with democracy as a concept is every 4 or 5 years you basically allow mob rule. Now, I am a Democrat through and through. I believe in democracy. I believe it is the best system there is. But I do know what he was getting at. Um, for the most part, people tend to cling to criticism and negativity, not so much in terms of responding to campaigns, but in terms of their own attitudes, than positivity and hope. What I'm driving at with that is you're much more likely to hear people criticizing politicians than giving them any sort of praise. So I think I knew what he was getting at with saying that democracy is basically allowing mob rule every 4 or 5 years. It's a bit of an exaggeration, obviously, but I know what he was driving at. And although I'm a Democrat, I can definitely see some logic in that. Um, because you do get situations where you have very decent MPs of all colours who have worked hard for their constituents, but there may be a particular populist trend or rival candidate who manages to touch on something or whatever that then unseats them. And the unique thing about being a politician, and I think it's fair to say this is unique, is that they lose their jobs in a very public way. Other people can be made redundant or resign or get sacked, but generally speaking, only they and maybe their colleagues know about it. For a politician, it's in the national glare. When the votes come in and they're standing there, and if the incumbent MP loses his or her seat, they're basically losing their job in the public eye. I think it has to be a tough thing to take. And that's why one prerequisite, I think, to be any politician, but particularly at that level, and this applies all the more the higher up politicians get, is tough skin. Perhaps this is something that's underestimated. Tough skin. Not just tough skin, but actual physical toughness as well. Because if you are campaigning door to door, sometimes trekking miles upon miles upon miles in a given day. And I'm not exaggerating. In intense election campaigns, it can be like that. And you have to maybe get up at 7 in the morning, go to bed at maybe 1 a.m., especially during an election cycle. That takes physical toughness to sort of battle against the natural fatigue that would set in. So, and that's not to say that politicians are the only people that go through that, of course not. But I'm just making the point that it is a tough job. And anyone who says it isn't, I think they're deluded. Of course it's tough because every single decision you make is scrutinized in a way that is very personal. The other jobs don't necessarily, that wouldn't, they wouldn't necessarily face that because every profession gets criticism at some point. You might get police officers being criticized for not arresting criminals, or maybe doctors get criticized for waiting times, or whatever it is. Every profession gets criticized in some way or another. But I think with politicians, it's uniquely personal. Okay, maybe you could say the same for business people and newspaper editors. But the thing about newspaper editors is I believe they are a lot more protected than politicians, because most people wouldn't even know what the editor of the Sun looks like, whereas everyone knows what David Cameron or Jeremy Corbyn looks like. And that's right. People should know who their leaders are. The point I'm making is this is a job that faces a unique level of scrutiny. I really do believe that. So when people criticize politicians, they need to just bear that in mind, I think. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying don't criticize, I'm just saying people need to bear that in mind. But anyway, to get back to the specific issue that I was going to raise, I was using that as a pretext because I think it is related. Anger and politics. I spoke there about the need for politicians to have tough skin, but I think another very very important aspect is to have the right temperament, because I think getting into the political arena, you're dealing with constant confrontation, basically confrontation insofar as media scrutiny and indirect one-to-one debates with your political opponents. So I think that's another thing about being a politician. You can't be shy of confrontation because it's an inevitable part of the job. Being able to argue your case and put forward your policies whilst being scrutinized for it. Um, but I find a lot of people who criticize politicians, and I include myself in this, I've criticized those in power. I could read a particular news report, or I could be dwelling on a particular issue, and it could be international or domestic, whatever it is, and it could really work me up. Now, I would be a liar if I said I'm a constantly calm person. I'm not. I do get worked up about certain things. I am a passionate person. I have strong views on certain subjects. So when I hear certain opinions, whether it be online or in interviews or on the news, um, yeah, sometimes I do lose my temper because I think that those particular opinions are coming from a point of ignorance and callousness. And this notion of ignorance or callousness leads to anger, and then the perception of injustice. These are all very, very natural human sentiments. And whilst on one hand that is very honest, on the other hand, I'm thinking if I had this temperament as an MP, I wouldn't survive. So I think MPs need to find a way to not necessarily hide anger. Sometimes the public responds well to a parliamentarian who is visibly angry in the way that they are. I'll cite a recent example. Andy Burnham was very vocal in his support of the Hillsborough campaign, and he made it known that he was angry about the way the Hillsborough fans have been treated and the Hillsborough survivors have been treated. So I don't think it's necessarily damaging to an MP to express anger. Certainly, looking at the United States, Trump's anger has been very good in galvanizing. I mean, for him, it's been very good at galvanizing his support. So, anger is not necessarily an Achilles heel for a politician, but it does depend on the context. Because anger can also lead the politician to being portrayed, rightly or wrongly, as an extremist. Now, as a centrist, one thing I notice that seems to get directed perhaps at centrist thinkers, and perhaps one reason for this is that centrism itself is not really a specific ideology. But one of the main things is that if you're a centrist, you kind of sit on the fence. So people assume you don't have strong views on things. Socialists are socialists, conservatives are conservatives. So we're centrists. People think that we're kind of, wishy-washy or can't make our mind up or whatever. The truth is, I have very strong views on a lot of subjects, and I find I get pissed off with the left, I get pissed off with the right in roughly equal measure. And that's not to say I'm an angry, bitter person who's always angry. There's plenty of times I feel inspired and I feel encouraged, and I agree with something that is being said. But what I'm saying is that I do have strong views, and I think a lot of people do in society. You just have to look at cyberspace to see this, especially in the UK. A lot of people have a lot of strong views on a lot of subjects. So the issue I want to raise is it really such a big deal if a politician expresses his or her candid view? If that view happens to be politically incorrect or radical or whatever way you want to put it, is that really such a big problem? I sometimes feel concerned that we focus too much on trying to make MPs, I was going to say Stepford wives, maybe that's not the right term, but we almost expect them to be squeaky clean. And when something is dug up from 3 or 4 or 5 years ago that they reportedly said online, if you really want to scrutinize people that way, then most of us making YouTube videos and most people active in cyberspace would be ineligible to be an MP or a senator, because I defy anyone to say that they haven't said something very sharp when they have felt strongly about a certain subject. So why shouldn't MPs be honest and candid in terms of their own views? I think one issue here is a vicious cycle, is we have an absolutely ruthless media that instead of just doing their job and scrutinizing politicians, they actively get involved in partisan politics and they go out of their way to smear politicians if they don't agree with their views. It should be a case of, yes, holding them to account, but the partisanism that we see in the media is so blatantly obvious. And I am saying the media in general, because pretty much every network and newspaper is guilty of it on some level. I'm not saying that journalists can't have an opinion, but I do believe that it changes the concept of journalism when those opinions become so personal. I mean, Ken Livingstone, the first mayor of London, when he made his concession speech in 2008, I think he made some strong points. A lot of people said, "Oh, he's just a sore loser. He's blaming the media." I didn't read it that way. I thought he was onto something. He said, "This race is not about two men; it's about 8 million Londoners." And he theorised that the reason at that time that Manchester and Birmingham had rejected the idea of a directly elected mayor was that the media plays a large part in fueling cynicism. I really think that if we are to live in a vibrant democracy, politicians should frankly be able to say whatever they want. If they have extreme views, and if they are found to have genuinely sexist or homophobic or racist views, they should absolutely face heat for that. They should be questioned about it. But I don't believe that people should resign if they have a democratic mandate, if they're elected by the people. I don't think they should be forced to resign. They should face scrutiny, they should face tough questions, but resign? I'm not sure about that, because that surely is undemocratic. If someone, let's say for the sake of argument, someone is elected and they have a 10,000 vote majority, then let's say they come up with a view that's quite controversial, but it's only consistent with the sort of character that they are. Now, should they resign because the view happens to be politically incorrect? I don't think so, because then you would have people resigning all the time, and what you would be left with is super polite, squeaky clean politicians who never ever say anything controversial. That to me is totally insincere. We should, we talk about opportunity in this country. That should include the opportunity to be absolutely candid, including holding controversial views. And rivals can then argue that, debate that, talk about that. That's why in my previous video I was talking about Sadiq Khan and some of the nonsense, in my opinion, that's been coming from the far right. What I was careful to say or not say, I've never said that Sadiq Khan shouldn't be scrutinised. And if it does transpire in the next 4 years that he has pro Islamist sympathies and he's not doing enough to combat Islamism, he should absolutely face tough questions for that. Absolutely. But there has to be a scope. The reason I'm tying all of this in with anger is because politicians have as much right to be angry as anyone else. I mean, you really want people who are robots and who just technocratically do their job as in a robotic sort of way without having human emotions like anger, like jubilation. Of course not, because then they wouldn't really be representing the people, which is the whole point of democracy. So what I'm driving at is I really couldn't care less if a politician makes a controversial statement, and I really, really think that the media makes too big an issue out of this. Yes, they should be scrutinized. Yes, they should face questions. But when you have something that is churned out over and over and over again, it becomes much less about scrutiny and much more about a personal attack campaign. And that really puts me off. And I think the media, collectively, because they're all guilty of it, um, really needs an answer for this. I don't think it helps democracy. Um, in short, I think politicians should be allowed to say what they want. Now, clearly, you have to be level headed if you want to be elected. And if you're going to isolate a large part of the population, you're not going to get elected. But that's why we have a democratic process. And the beautiful thing about democracy is you have a choice. So if you do hate someone's guts, if you think they're terrible, if you think they're an extremist, don't vote for them. Make a video, just like I'm doing, talking about why you think they're an extremist and why people shouldn't vote for them. Um, you know, but the bottom line is, so long as people are not advocating violence against others, I think fundamentally, if we really are talking about opportunity in this country, more or less anyone should be allowed to stand. Unless the caveat to that is if they're actually advocating violence, or the other thing I would add is if they're explicitly anti British, because that just defeats the point of being a politician of the United Kingdom. Um, so, yeah, those two things, if they're explicitly talking about violence or if they're explicitly anti British. Those are the only two factors I think should stop people from standing. I even don't have a problem with ex criminals standing. If they're reformed, if they've done their time, why not? If we expect people to be functioning members of society again, if we really want to rehabilitate ex offenders, yeah, they should also be allowed to stand. If it comes up in the election, it comes up in the election. But I don't believe in hounding and demonizing people for past mistakes or past things they've said. And that again ties into this thing about Sadiq Khan. Okay, maybe in the past he did have dubious positions, and maybe he did make some foolish statements. But from what I can tell, he has apologized for those things. For example, he once supposedly called moderate Muslims Uncle Toms. Now, he was challenged about that. He's answered it, and as far as I can tell, he apologized for it. So, why constantly hound someone for the past? Sadiq Khan also has a record of supporting gay marriage, and like I say, he had a fatwa issued against him for his liberal position. So I don't believe in hounding people continuously for past positions. Clarify what the position is at the present and work with that. I would say I hold this to everyone. Mary Black, the SNP MP, um, she received a lot of heat because she had put rather unsavory comments online about headbutting opponents and so on. Very stupid thing to say, but she was a rather naive teenager at the time. Now, I don't like her party, but I think she's made up for it since then. I think she has. being responsible in a role. And, I think I really don't believe in hounding and vilifying people for the past. If that was the case, I could never stand, because I've said things online that aren't exactly politically correct. I've never spread hatred or advocated violence, but I have said things that are not particularly politically correct, to right or left wing, by the way. All I'm saying is if people want honesty in politicians, then we have to allow honesty as well. That's the caveat. You can't say all these politicians are all liars, they're only in it for themselves. Oh, but that person's an extremist because they're being honest. You can't have it both ways. Um, Politicians have a very, very loaded job to do. And I don't think we help the democratic process by constantly running them down. I really don't. Yes, they should be held to account. Yes, they should be criticised where it's apt. Yes, there should be free discussion and debate on all these issues. But the media also has a part to play, and I don't believe that constantly pillorying people simply for being candid is the right way to go about things. Let me know your thoughts.